about the music during the 60s, released in 1996. It was about the birth and the death of a one-hit rock and roll band. This band was going to enter the talent show in Gatton College. However, the drummer broke his arm, so they chose Guy Patterson, who is a worker for his father's appliance shop, and he loves jazz, and jazz is very upbeat. However, the band is like a ballad band. They're used to slow song, and that's what Guy Patterson put something new into their music, make their music more upbeat. Personally, I like this movie a lot because it represented the era very well. Clock radio was such a hit back then, and Guy Patterson has always been selling in his appliance store. And well, the fashion and the cars are definitely on point. Like, I couldn't name all the cars, but I know for sure that they are cars from the 60s and they have the same kind of style. Well, the fashion for the middle class, they often wear like jeans and like really simple dresses, whereas when the band progresses and started performing in the cities, you can see a dramatic change in fashion where girls will start wearing gloves, posher look to them, like fur clothes and stuff like that. For the boys too, the concerts in the cities, they were wearing suits. The guitarist was very, very excited when he had a chance to hook up with this blonde Playboy bunny, because Playboy was the thing back then for a male, where the standard for hot women came from. The rock and roll genre was only popular to the teenagers and the youngsters, and that's where it gets a little crazy when girls started jumping on the car roofs and like screaming. For one of their final performances, the teenagers and the youngsters were the only ones screaming and making noises for the band, and the olders were just sitting there like they don't know what to say, because they're not interested in that type of music. The director and the play script writer was Tom Hanks. Mrs. Stallhoff was one of his minor fans. She watched many of his performances, for example, He Knows You're Not Alone, Philadelphia, and Forrest Gump. She was surprised when she knew Tom Hanks wrote this movie script in just under 30 days. Mr. Lagore said that back then Tom Hanks was an A1 celebrity. Mr. Lagore believes that Tom Hanks was put into this movie only because he was a great actor, but because he was very popular and it would bring the ratings of this movie shooting up, and therefore they would make more money. So in the end, everything was about the money and not about the passion or the plot. A lot of bands back in the 60s were one-hit bands due to the conflict with the labels and how they were treated. That was so accurate, how the lead singer didn't want the label to take credit for the song that he wrote, but the label would allow their artists to have freedom. They sort of deceived, but not necessarily, through signing contracts saying they would do what their label wants them to do. And thus, many groups disbanded. Many groups have also disbanded because of women, money, and fame. I thought that was represented extremely well. And the bass player also talked to the Marines and wanted to enlist in the army. That's where the draft started for the Vietnam War. The whole soundtrack was original. They created the whole thing. That was so amazing. The songs that they say were very lively, really represented what rock and roll was all about. It just makes you want to get up from the chair and start dancing. Was a movie published in 2009. It talked about the teenagers, especially women, during the 60s. It was about this 16-year-old girl who lived in Britain, and she has always dreamt of going to Oxford to study English, and she had this huge interest for the French culture. In her high school, she also plays cello just for the sake of making her application look better for the college. And through cello, she met this guy, this really old guy, 30-something-year-old. He sort of flirted with her through cello and music and her interest for the French culture, and he used that to his advantage. As time goes by, she started to love him, but then she didn't realize that he had a wife and a son. So in the end, she was the one who suffered. French culture was very fascinating for the teenage girls with their culture, their books, their music. Most of them talked about love, which really appealed to the girls' emotions. That's why the protagonists liked them. This was set during the post-war era, and so all the family have had a chance to rebuild all their businesses and make more money, and thus they would have a lot of money to spend on their children. That's how the protagonist was able to afford a private high school. Her outfit, her uniform, skirt was always pulled up to around above waist area with like a tie and a skirt. I thought that was the basic uniform for girls back then. She also wore stiletto heels, which are really pointy ones, and they were considered to be very feminine. The shop that was right next to the tea shop that she and her friends would always go to, that shop had posters stuck all over the window, and those posters were of the pop art culture and really shows clearly what the era was. 60s was a rebellious period for the teenagers. They just like to go against the norm. They won't really listen to their parents and they'll argue against them. In this rebellious time, teenagers started drinking alcohol, which the protagonist did. She started drinking wine, smoked cigarettes, and one of the type that she smoked was called the Russian Sobranie, and that cigarette was sort of the more gourmet sort of cigarette. It was more expensive than regular ones. When her friends asked her about it, she showed off to her friends that these cigarettes are only available in France. 60 was an era that was very important for women's rights movement, where the protagonist dreams of going to a college rather than getting a family, suggests that there's this change in the way the women thinks, and they want to get a job and be independent rather than be dependent upon a man. Rather than that, they are now wanting to get a job for themselves. And has met the wife of Mr. David, who is her older lover. Mrs. David told her that this wasn't the first time that David has deceived a young lady, and that he has done it many times before and even gotten pregnant. And the protagonist was already warned by the adults in her school, telling her that this was not a good idea and that many girls had experienced this before. And the protagonist didn't listen and thus caught herself into this problem where she has to fight her feelings in order to move on. And I guess this was a common thing throughout the 1960s, where teenagers, in hopes of getting a better life, a fun life, an enjoyable life, they believe that they give in to the older male things that they say to make the naive teenagers believe that they could potentially provide them with a better life. To go out with David, she started to put on these really posh looking outfits and really expensive outfits, especially with furs and animal prints, because apparently that's what shows wealth. She also wears dresses that curves in when it approaches her waist to accentuate the waistline and make your bust bigger, which was a desirable body shape back then. And the trench coats that she wears are often have a rope around her waist, which creates that body shape. Chanel No. 5, the perfume brand, was like a really big thing back then because it was mentioned like twice or like 3 times, and the protagonist even attempted to sort of bribe her teacher with that perfume. I guess like it smelled really good or something. That's why everyone was like crazy over it. Even the nerd from another class asked her if she could buy for her like the Coco Chanel. I guess that was really where the protagonist started licking off the mixer after her mom was done making cakes and stuff. And I guess that according to Mama Mia, that was one of the things that people would do back then. Youngsters would be allowed to lick off that mixer after their mom was done with it. Her older lover, the 30-something-ish-year-old man, he said something about stats, which means that the white older women were scared of the African Americans, and thus he often moves them into the household in which the older women lived in to bring the value of the house down. The older women were often scared of African Americans, and thus they would sell the house, and therefore David would make money out of it by buying it at a cheaper price, selling it at a higher price. And this shows that there was a little segregation during that era in Britain.